Hey guys, welcome to the third video in this series on food theory basics. I'm feeling kind of salty. By that I mean I feel like talking about salt. I think this is an important concept and base that not enough people really talk about. They say, oh, properly salt your food, properly season your food. But what does that necessarily really mean? How do you properly do it? Just to taste every time? Well, if you get into doing large quantity batches for catering or for a restaurant, it's better to at least have a really good starting point than taste after, as opposed to, okay, here's a tablespoon, stir it, taste it, and you do that, and it takes you, 10, 15 minutes to properly salt your dish, as opposed to you have a really good base point, and maybe it takes, one or two more tries to get it right, and it's cut down to less than 5 minutes for properly salting. So we're gonna talk about different types of salt as well, and why you should use certain ones and not others. We're going to start with iodized salt, which is the most common salt, table salt. It was originally created in the 1920s to prevent goiter, something that is not common in first world countries anymore. That's back when, food just was scarce everywhere. Like food was not in the abundance that we have it today. We are spoiled compared to our ancestors, and maybe to the point where we're spoiled rotten. Really, you definitely never saw as many food diseases, but you definitely saw death from other things, such as goiter, which I'm glad that we don't really have to suffer from today. But that was the original reason for adding iodine to the salt. So one of the issues with iodized salt, it becomes oxidized at higher temperatures. That's why I just don't like cooking with it. It'd be okay at your table, just like to add a little bit extra salt on top of a steak after it was cooked, but it's not something that you want to cook with. If you salt your steak ahead of time with this, and then you go to sear it in a raging hot pan, it's gonna oxidize the iodine, of course, and when you go to eat it, it's gonna have this almost metallic taste, like a little tang or twinge, whatever you want to say. Really, it's hard to exactly describe. Metallic is the best way. It's just kind of off-putting. It's not something that I enjoy, and I don't know anyone that does enjoy it. But like if you're one of zero and you're the person that enjoys it, enjoy it and feel free. I'm not here to tell you not to do it for yourself, but I will say do not use it for clients. The average person is not going to want to consume that, and it's not very enjoyable. Now, as discussed, it's okay for finishing salt on top of wet foods, because it's going to stick to the food and it's just going to add salt to it. It's obviously the cheapest salt, so a lot of people just want to use it, and I can get why when things and expenses just continue to add up. Everything's more expensive these days, even other salts. So I can understand why people want to use it. I would just avoid it unless it's in a specific practical use like this, where you're going to salt your juicy steak afterwards or fries right out of the oil. However, because of the shape of table salt, it is terrible for trying to salt dry foods. The salt is just going to bounce right off. It really is. An issue that I don't want to talk about either is table salt is so fine. So it's really tough to know, just like a pinch and sprinkling it on, how much you just add, or even sprinkling it out of the jar. Sometimes like, is that enough? Try it and you're like, okay, no, and then you do a couple more and you're like, holy fuck, that's salty, that's too salty, because you didn't see how much was actually coming. With more coarse salts, you're able to feel it, you're able to see it. It's not something that you can really do with table salt. You'll feel a little bit in your hand, but you're not gonna really know how many granules you're getting or if it's spread out evenly, really. So I try to avoid this salt. I don't keep it in my house. I will not use it cooking for customers, but if it's something that you already have, don't just throw it out. I mean, you're going to want to use it up. But now you'll know going forward the practicalities of it and why you don't really want to use it. Kosher salt. This is my preferred salt. This is the salt I use more than anything else when it comes to cooking. Um, just because it's kosher salt, um, well, sorry, let's put it this way. Every salt is technically kosher by religion standards. The reason this is called kosher salt is because it's used to draw the excess blood or myoglobin out from meats during the kosher process. Um, And you'll be able to tell that when you could take a steak, put your table salt on it, although you're going to ruin it, or half the steak, and then take the other half and sprinkle with kosher salt and see which one draws out more moisture. You're going to notice pretty quickly that, within an hour or two, that the kosher salt is taking out more moisture. So, kosher salt does not oxidize at high temperatures. Again, it is my preferred salt for cooking. You're able to see it. It's a good texture. It sticks to food, including dry foods. So I like to use it more than anything else. It's not crazy expensive. It's going to stick to the food. I can see how much I'm putting on it right away. It can provide a nice texture if you're using it even as a finishing salt afterwards. And you're not going to run into the issue of it bouncing off stuff like you did with iodized salt. And if you really you wanted it finer, you can take kosher salt, just put it into a really good food processor or blender, and just turn it on. Walk away for a minute or two, come back. The thing's going to be dust, but it's still going to keep its molecular shape of being able to stick to food. The ever-expanding world of sea salt. Welcome to the new world. Uh, all the salt that you buy comes from the sea, and they're obviously marketed different. One of the things is sea salt, if it's just labeled sea salt, is not going to be iodized. You can obviously get different salts from different parts of the sea, but they're not going to have much differences. One of the more popular ones is Himalayan pink sea salt, which, truth be told, it does contain more minerals than other salts. However, those minerals are so minute, it's insignificant. If you ate enough for you to get your daily required vitamins or nutrients, or even for it to make a difference in that regard, for you to get, let's say, a gram of magnesium in you, you would have to eat enough of that salt to make you very sick. You would feel disgusting. You don't do that. Don't be eating salt for its minerals. That is not why you eat salt. Now, it can be used as a nice finishing salt, though. It's got a nice color. The flavor is fine. Although, weirdly enough, I think that it doesn't taste as salty as other salts. Weirdly, I don't know how to describe it. It feels like the salinity is lower, and it takes more of Himalayan pink sea salt to properly season something than, say, kosher salt. I'm not sure about the science behind that. Tried looking into it. Couldn't really find anything, of gumpture or any studies, but other people that are like-minded and have the same experience. So try it yourself. If you have pink Himalayan sea salt at home and kosher salt, take a cup of stock, grind your Himalayan pink salt so you have, a quarter teaspoon or whatever in a little cup. Take a sip of that, then add a quarter teaspoon of kosher salt to another one. Take a sip of that. You'll notice that the kosher salt one is saltier. It's very strange, but it's true. Now, on to the next one. Finishing salts. Um, this one is where it can get kind of expensive. There are some very expensive salts in this world, and that just has to do with the process in creating those salts, whether it's the shapes they keep, or, for instance, smoked salt obviously goes for an extra process. Maldon salt is a very coarse textured salt, and it does provide a nice texture like crunch and presentation. I have some at home. I do use this. Um, I would use it sparingly, though. This isn't a salt you're going to want to season with because it is expensive. I mean, a box about this big, I can't remember the weight on it, might be 250 grams, $12. Um, it is usually around $20 a pound. Um, that's expensive for salt. Very expensive. Um, so use it sparingly if you have it. I do really like it. And with its texture, it does stick to pretty much any food as well, similar to kosher salt. But I do think it has a nicer texture. It's got a really, not only is it coarse, but it's like a flaky texture to the point where it also like shatters, like it breaks very easily, which is a nice texture. The aforementioned Himalayan pink sea salt. So this really would be because of the color of your dish. Um, Maybe you're doing something with like a rosette vinegar or something like that, and you want to accent those colors with the finishing salt and add a little bit more, salinity to the dish. So you'd use pink salt in that specific situation so that it can either blend in with the color or accent the color, put a little bit around the rim, which culinary school chefs always argue against. It's hilarious because you see the best chefs in the world do these kinds of things, and then what they say is, well, what if someone just takes the whole goddamn, rim full of salt and tries to eat that at once? Well, I believe in Darwinism, and I wish them a good night. So it's just not something that somebody's going to do. No one with any common sense is going to see salt, or if you did a pepper lining and take all that and eat that. It makes no sense. But it can be a nice presentation, a nice addition to the dish. Now, flavored salt. I don't know if the company is still around. We used to carry them at my store. We stopped because our supplier for them had stopped carrying them back then, which would have been 10 years ago. And I still keep a little jar. I use it so sparingly because it is the best smoked sea salt that I had ever had. It's a great finishing for red meats if you don't have a smoker and you just want a little touch of it at the end. Um, it's good in sauces. So like if I wanted to do some kind of a whipped mayo dressing and want a bit of smoke to it, I would add my smoked sea salt instead of liquid smoke. Not really too big of a fan of liquid smoke. One, it's going to make the sauce runnier, which if you're looking for that texture, you can get it through other means, but it's not the same smoke as this. This is actually smoked salt, so it's got a real smoke flavor to it, not an artificial one. Um, And there's other salts out there. There's balsamic reduced salt, and I'm sure maple salt. There's salts of every flavor that you could probably imagine, and different companies do that. If you're interested in the company that I had mentioned, it's called Just a Touch. And it came in just little plastic jars, and that's all my smoked sea salt came in. Still have it. Not going to get rid of it until the day that I don't know, save it for my wedding. Maybe I'll use the last of it for the groom's party. I use just a pinch into like every single thing that I need it for. I use just a little bit to the point where I can taste it, or sometimes I use it as a little finishing salt on top of my steak because it's that damn good. I could take a pinch of it and eat it myself just like that, but I have too scarce of a resource for it right now, and I haven't tried other smoked salts to be fair, so I don't know if there's any as good as this one. The only other place I would have had it is I've had them at restaurants, but I don't know what brands those are, so I can't talk about them. And they're none of them is good. Salting the right amounts. This is where we talk about having a baseline, and then you can taste your seasoning afterwards. So our saliva contains about 0.5% of salt by weight. That is why if you have something that isn't salted, it just doesn't taste right, particularly meats, proteins. Just tastes bland. It tastes really plain. And the reason you don't get that as much with fruits and vegetables when you eat them raw, they don't seem too bad. They naturally have a higher salinity than protein. So you don't have to salt them as much as you would a protein. And I think everybody knows that. You're not going to add as much salt to a saute pan of vegetables as you do to even just one steak. So when you go to properly salt this does depend on the dish you are making, your clientele, and their taste. If you are between 0.75 and 1.25% salt by weight, you're going to be at a pretty good mark. And you could adjust it afterwards from there. 1.25% is going to be a little bit on the saltier end, and 0.75 obviously on the lighter end. I typically go right in the middle as my starting point. I go straight at 1% and go from there. If I need more salt, I'll add it, And if I need less, I could add a little bit of liquid to it or whatever it may be. This specific technique is best for large batching. Like I'm not going to sit there and measure 1% salt by weight for my steak. I'm just going to eye it. I'm going to salt it properly every time, and I'm going to be fine. But you cook 10 pounds of soup or a stock that's finished simmering, it's finally a broth, and you want to season it. You take your pot, you put it on a scale, assuming that you've already tared a pot of the same weight, and it measures out at 10 pounds. Add 1% salt by weight, so 0.1 pounds of salt to that soup. It's going to be properly salted, or at least very close. Taste it after that, and then you can adjust your salt. Like I said, that's going to be way easier than just tablespoon at a time and taking 15 to 20 minutes to salt the dish that way. Now, using salt for curing or brining. You cure, you gotta have a minimum of 2%. I typically go 2 to 2.5% because I don't want my stuff that salty. There's gonna be different, products that you want saltier, like salted pork. I'm not gonna bother weighing that. It's gonna be so much more salt because it's absolutely packed in salt. Right? Like you're not gonna worry about weighing that out. But if I'm doing something like my own bacon, which I make once in a while, basically for myself, I will do it by weight. I'll go to make my seasoning mixture. I'll weigh up my pork belly, have it either 5 pounds or 10 pounds, depending on how much I'm making. Scale out my salts, and then all my other ingredients from there. Now, if you're doing a brine, you're going to go with 5% salts by weight to liquid. So if you were using, 10 pounds of water, you'd use 0.5 or half a pound of salt in that water for the brine. Now, you can go as high as 10% salt, which is good for something where you're not only just trying to cure it, but you're not seasoning it at all after. You're not adding anything to it. And also with brines, especially when you're going that high of percentage, wash them thoroughly. You're gonna have to wash off some of the sodium, or it's gonna be salty as hell. So we do a corned beef that is absolutely phenomenal. The salt ratio is closer to 5% salt by weight. That's a little bit over that. It's about 6.5, and even that is pretty salty. We do use 0.5% of that is curing salt, which is definitely saltier, and you most certainly need to wash that stuff off. But we rinse it thoroughly. It still gets boiled, and it's still extremely well seasoned. You still don't need anything additional for salt at all. If you are planning on adding a sauce or something, then go on the lower end for sure. You could even probably go, if it's not a brine for curing, it's just that you want to maintain moisture inside of a product, you could go lower to like 3.5, 4% of salt by weight. Still make sure to wash it thoroughly, or even let it soak in water for an hour or so before you cook it. And then you could add your gravy or whatever it may be. It'll be seasoned throughout, and it won't get overly salty that way. Although I personally recommend dry brining. If you are going to go that method, if the brine is literally just to maintain moisture, dry brining is way better. I know that we discussed how kosher salt draws the moisture up more. The funny thing about that is, if it is sitting on something like flats, although some moisture will stay out of it, that salt draws out the myoglobin and any juice that's inside the steak or whatever you're making, and then the salt penetrates inside of the meat, and when it goes in, it brings some of that moisture back in, and the salt helps trap the moisture, so it actually keeps it juicier when it's cooking, even though you've lost juices ahead of time. So I recommend trying that as an experiment as well. I think that if you're inexperienced with anything like this, you should always try to experiment. Grab a steak, cut in half, salt one ahead of time in your fridge overnight with kosher salt. Take the other one, salted, give it a fair fighting chance, maybe half an hour, right, ahead of time. Cook both and see the difference of which is juicier. It's going to be the one you salted overnight. It's also going to be a lot more flavorful because the salt will have properly penetrated. It'll have seasoned through to the middle, or at least as close to the middle as you're going to get in 24 hours. It's definitely going to be a lot more than the steak you've only seasoned for half an hour. So that concludes this lesson. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you guys. Please leave feedback as always. What you enjoy, what you'd like to see improved, and again, stay awesome.